The wind, a relentless artist, had sculpted Eleanor Vance's fate long before she ever felt its icy bite on the Colorado plains. Her destiny, a gilded cage back in Philadelphia, had been sealed by her father, Lord Vance, who'd chosen her husband, Baron Harding, a man of 65 years, whose handshake was a business contract and whose voice brokered only deals, never affection. At 28, Eleanor's life was a meticulously arranged parlor, beautiful but barren of her own desires. So, she bought a train ticket and fled. Stepping onto the dusty platform of Fort Despair in the spring of 1878, the crisp air struck her like a bracing challenge. Around her, the land stretched raw and untamed. No polished cobblestones, no polite chamber music, just endless sky, rough-hewn timber, and men whose very presence seemed rooted to the earth. She clutched her leather satchel, a small fortress against the overwhelming newness, and silently declared she would not be afraid. A teaching position at the small schoolhouse on the edge of town awaited her. It was her desperate grasp at freedom, a chance to be Miss Vance instead of someone's chattel. Sheriff Brody, the school board chairman, met her with formal courtesy, driving her through town in a creaking wagon. She glimpsed the rusty spur saloons, swinging doors, Miller's Dry Goods with its grimy windows, and cowboys securing their horses to hitching posts. Everything felt rugged, unfinished, yet undeniably honest. Ma Halloway's boarding house became her new haven. The 60-year-old widow was kind but unyielding. Breakfast and dinner at 6, chapel on Sundays, and no male visitors allowed in private rooms. Eleanor, having come so far to carve her own path, agreed to every regulation without a word of complaint. The following morning, well before dawn, she walked to the schoolhouse. It was a modest building, white paint flaking, but its windows gleamed from a recent cleaning. Inside, wooden benches faced a worn chalkboard and a sturdy teacher's desk. The scent of chalk dust and old pine filled the air. She meticulously arranged her books into neat stacks, her hand tracing the smooth wood of the desk, a soft smile gracing her lips. This was hers. As she adjusted the slate boards, the door groaned open behind her, and a tall silhouette filled the frame. "Pardon me, Mississippi." The voice was deep, unwavering, carrying the weathered tone of a man who spent his life under the vast sky. Eleanor turned slowly. He stepped inside, removing his broad-brimmed hat. Dark hair, sun-streaked, fell across his forehead. His skin was tanned, his shoulders broad beneath a faded denim jacket. His eyes, the color of a gathering storm over the prairie, met hers. I'm the new teacher," she stated quickly, straightening her posture. "Eleanor Vance." "Colt Blackwood," he replied. "Been patching the school stable roof, still a persistent leak near the back corner." His hands were large, calloused, utterly unlike the soft, manicured hands of Philadelphia gentlemen. His boots were dusted with trail dirt. Everything about him spoke of toil and long days. "I appreciate your efforts, Mr. Blackwood," she answered politely. A fleeting smile touched his lips. "Just Colt is fine." She turned back to her books. "I prefer proper address." A low chuckle escaped him. "City folk," he murmured. "You're a long way from Philadelphia." Her fingers paused. "This is my home now," she replied, her voice firm. Something shifted in his expression then, not mockery, not judgment, but something akin to respect. "Well, Miss Vance," he said softly, "welcome to the Colorado territory." He stepped back outside, climbing his ladder to the stable roof. She could hear the steady rhythm of his hammer against the shingles. Despite herself, her eyes drifted to the window more than once. By Sunday, Eleanor had committed the names of all 37 students to memory. Children of prospectors, settlers, and trappers, some nearly her own age. She was fiercely determined to prove herself. At chapel, whispers followed her, curious glances mixed with warm smiles. This town watched everything. After the service, she was invited to Sunday dinner at the Cooper house. The home buzzed with lively chatter. Children, like young Billy Cooper, darted between tables. Women carried platters of roasted game. while men discussed livestock and the coming weather. Then, the back door opened, and Colt Blackwood entered, an armload of firewood clutched to his chest. Their eyes met across the room. "Miss Vance," he greeted simply. Martha Cooper, Billy's mother, beamed proudly. "Colt owns one of the largest ranches in these parts." He shifted uncomfortably under the praise. Eleanor tried to concentrate on her plate, but she felt his presence throughout the entire meal. Later, as the gathering dispersed, Colt insisted on walking her back to the boarding house. "It's not proper for a lady to walk alone," he said calmly. "I can manage," she replied. "I don't doubt it." They walked in silence for a few moments, the sky painted with soft orange and purple hues as the town settled into evening quiet. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked. "My first full day does not frighten me," she answered. Then, after a pause, "Perhaps only a little. I reckon you'll do just fine." They reached the boarding house steps too quickly. She turned to thank him, realizing he stood closer than expected. "Good luck, Miss Vance." His eyes held hers a second longer than necessary. She felt something stir in her chest, something entirely unrelated to fear. Monday arrived with bright sunlight and a flurry of nerves. The children filled the classroom with their boundless energy and noise. Eleanor's voice rang clear and steady as she began her lessons. By midday, confidence began to bloom within her. The children respected her. They listened. Days turned into weeks. Autumn painted the land in gold and red. Eleanor settled into a comfortable routine, teaching, grading, reading by lamplight. And Colt Blackwood appeared now and then. Sometimes he rode through town, tipping his hat. Sometimes he stopped to inquire about the school's outhouse door or the impending winter weather. Each time, her heart behaved in ways she could not control. In late October, the town held a harvest social at the community hall. "Ma alloué insisted il y a no attend." "You're part of this town now," she declared. Eleanor wore an indigo gown she'd nearly left behind in Philadelphia, and pinned her hair more softly than usual. When she entered the hall, lantern light cast a warm glow on the wooden walls. Laughter filled the air, and a fiddle tune began to play. She had just accepted a cup of punch when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You look lovely tonight." She turned. Colt stood there in a clean white shirt and dark vest, freshly shaven, his hair brushed back. Still rugged, still unmistakably himself. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. May I have this dance?" Her breath caught. The fiddle struck up a lively tune. He placed one hand respectfully at her waist, his other holding hers steady. They moved together amid spinning skirts and stomping boots. "You dance well," she said softly. "My mother insisted," he replied with a small smile. The music slowed, and without a word, he drew her slightly closer. They moved in a gentle waltz, his eyes never leaving hers. "Why Colorado territory?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "In Philadelphia. My future was decided for me," she admitted. "An arranged marriage, a life chosen by someone else." His jaw tightened. "You ran?" "Yes. Brave. Necessary." The dance ended, but they remained near each other for the rest of the evening, talking, laughing, sharing fragments of their lives. When he walked her home that night, stars glittered above them like scattered silver. At the boarding house steps, he took her hand. "May I call on you properly?" "I would like that." He smiled slowly. "Good night, Eleanor." It was the first time he had spoken her name that way, soft, personal, and it stayed with her long after she closed her bedroom door. She didn't know then that the path she had chosen would lead her somewhere far deeper than freedom. It would lead her to a moment she would never forget. The moment her first kiss would be stolen. Winter arrived with a harshness no one could ignore and for despair. It came with sharp winds and skies heavy with warning. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the plains in a quiet white sheet. The schoolhouse grew colder each day, and Eleanor found herself arriving early to light the stove before her students came stamping in with red cheeks and frozen fingers. Colt began stopping by more often under the pretense of checking the windows and reinforcing the door frames. He never stayed long, but his presence filled the small room in a way that made it hard for her to breathe normally. One Saturday morning, Eleanor arrived to find him already inside. a small axe in hand, sealing a draft near the back wall. "Martha, Cooper mentioned you were worried about the cold," he said without turning. "Didn't want the children freezing through lessons." "You are very thoughtful, Mr. Blackwood." "Colt," he corrected softly. She pretended not to hear. They worked side by side for hours. She organized readers and writing slates. He secured loose shutters and checked the roof beams. The rhythm of their movements felt easy, natural. When she climbed onto a small stool to reach the upper shelf, it wobbled beneath her. Before she could lose balance, his hands caught her waist firmly. Her breath hitched. He steadied her and did not let go right away. His fingers were warm, even through the layers of fabric. She could feel the strength in his grip. "Careful," he said quietly. "I'm quite capable," she answered, though her voice came out softer than intended. "I know you are." He helped her down slowly. When her boots touched the floor, they were standing close, too close. The air between them felt charged, heavy. His eyes searched hers. "Eleanor," he said her name like it mattered. Her heart pounded hard against her ribs. He lifted his hand slowly, almost as if asking permission, and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. His touch was gentle, careful. She should step back. She should remind him of propriety. But she did not move. The door suddenly burst open, banging against the wall. Billy Cooper rushed inside, with his mother close behind. "Miss Vance," the boy shouted, breathless. They sprang apart at once. Martha Cooper's eyes moved from Colt to Eleanor and back again. Understanding settled on her face, followed by a small, knowing smile. "We brought extra fabric for the curtains," she said calmly. "It gets mighty cold in here." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, her cheeks burning. Colt cleared his throat and stepped away to gather his tools. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her narrow bed at the boarding house, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the moment over and over. The feel of his hands, the way he had said her name. In Philadelphia, such closeness would have been scandalous. Here, it felt inevitable. December came with a harshness no one could ignore. Snowstorms rolled across the plains without warning. Ranchers worked long hours to protect their cattle. Families stayed indoors as much as possible. Colt's visits grew less frequent. But when he did appear, he brought small gifts, fresh eggs, a jar of honey, a book he had found in Pueblo for her advanced students. "I saw it and thought of you," he said simply. She treasured every small offering. 3 days before Christmas, the worst blizzard in years struck the territory. The wind howled like something alive. Snow buried fences and drifted high against doors. School was canceled. Chapel was canceled, and the town disappeared beneath white silence. Eleanor sat by the boarding house window, watching the storm rage. She worried about Colt at his ranch miles away. On Christmas Eve, the storm finally weakened. The town gathered quietly in the boarding house parlor, as travel was still dangerous. They shared simple food and modest gifts. Eleanor gave handmade bookmarks to each resident. In return, she received small tokens of kindness. As the clock neared 9, a firm knock sounded at the front door. Ma Halloway opened it with surprise. Colt stood on the porch, covered in snow, breath fogging in the cold air. Eleanor's heart leapt into her throat. "Evening," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "Hope I'm not intruding." "You'll freeze to death if you stay out there," Ma Halloway said, pulling him inside. But his eyes found Eleanor at once. "I couldn't let Christmas pass without seeing you," he said softly. Later, when the others began to retire, he asked Ma Halloway for a moment of privacy on the front porch. The widow agreed with strict instruction that the door remain open. Outside, the world glowed under moonlight reflecting off snow. "You shouldn't have risked coming," Eleanor said. "Had to." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. She accepted it with trembling hands. Inside was a delicate gold pendant etched with a tiny prairie rose. When she opened it, a dried sprig of sagebrush rested within. "It's from Whisper Creek," he explained quietly. "From the day we picnicked." Tears filled her eyes. "It's beautiful." "May I?" he asked. She turned and lifted her hair. His fingers brushed the back of her neck as he fastened the chain. The touch sent warmth through her despite the cold air. When she faced him again, they stood inches apart. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low, "these months with you have changed something in me." Her heart beat so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "I care for you more than I ever expected." Before she could answer, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was sudden, soft, but unprepared. Her eyes widened in shock. Her body froze. When he pulled back, he saw tears forming in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't have taken that liberty." She shook her head, struggling for words. "It was my first kiss," she whispered. He stared at her, surprised. "Your first?" She nodded, embarrassed. "In Philadelphia, young ladies do not." Without proper understanding dawned in his expression. He stepped closer again, slower this time. "I'm sorry it was rushed," he said gently. "It should have been something worth remembering." He lifted his hand and cupped her cheek tenderly. "Let me show you how love is meant to feel." This time, when he kissed her, it was different. He moved slowly, giving her time to breathe, to choose. His lips were warm and certain. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer without force. Eleanor's hands trembled before resting lightly against his chest. She felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. The world around them faded into cold air and quiet night. When they parted, both were breathless. "I love you," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion. "I think I have since the first day I saw you standing in that schoolhouse." Her fear melted into something deeper. "I love you too," she answered. From inside, Ma Halloway cleared her throat loudly. Colt stepped back with a reluctant smile. "I'll call tomorrow if the roads allow." The days after Christmas passed in a glow of quiet happiness. Colt visited whenever possible. They spoke openly now of the future. On New Year's Eve, the town gathered in the chapel hall. Music and laughter filled the room. Near midnight, Colt led Eleanor to a quiet corner. "I have something to ask you," he said seriously. She felt her pulse quicken. "I don't have riches," he continued. "My ranch is still growing. The house is small." She squeezed his hands. "That does not matter. I love you, Eleanor. Will you marry me?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes." Joy lit his face as he pulled her close. Around them, the town counted down the final seconds of the year. When midnight struck, they sealed their promise with a kiss beneath ringing bells and cheering voices. Eleanor believed her story was unfolding exactly as it should. She did not yet know how fragile happiness could feel or how quickly love could be tested. Spring arrived slowly in the Colorado Territory, but when it came, it changed everything. Snow melted into rushing streams. Wildflowers pushed through the cold earth. The plains turned from white to green almost overnight. It felt like the land itself was waking up. Eleanor and Colt were married in April in the small white chapel at the center of Fort Despair. The entire town attended. Ranch hands in clean shirts, mothers with polished boots, children whispering and smiling from the front pews. Eleanor wore a simple white dress with lace along the sleeves. Wildflowers rested in her hair instead of jewels. She did not need anything more. When she walked down the aisle, Colt stood waiting for her, his eyes full of something steady and sure. He did not look at her like she was something fragile to own. He looked at her like she was his equal. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Colt kissed her gently. Slowly, with care, not rushed, not stolen. The town clapped and cheered. Eleanor felt no fear, only certainty. She moved into the ranch house a week later. It was smaller than the home she had grown up in, but it was warm, wooden floors, a stone fireplace, a porch that looked out over endless land. The first months of marriage were not perfect. Ranch life was harder than she imagined. Dawn came early. Some mornings Colt was gone before sunrise. Storms could change plans in an instant. Cattle fell ill. Fences broke. Money did not always come the way it should. There were nights when Colt returned exhausted, his shoulders heavy from the weight of responsibility. Eleanor learned to read the lines in his face. She learned when to speak and when to simply sit beside him. But through every challenge, he never raised his voice at her and never treated her as lesser, never made her feel small. He listened, and Eleanor, who had once fled a life chosen for her, realized she was now building one side by side with a man who respected her strength. She finished the school term before resigning. The children cried when she told them she would no longer teach full-time. Several parents asked if she would continue lessons privately. "I will," she promised. Education had been her freedom. She would not let it disappear. By summer, the ranch felt more like home than any place she had known before. She rode alongside Colt to check fences. She learned the names of the ranch hands. She kept careful records of supplies and expenses. Some evenings they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset stretch across the plains, deep gold and red. On one such evening, Colt looked at her thoughtfully. "Any regrets?" he asked. She knew what he meant: Philadelphia. The life she left behind. The comfort. The security. Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder. "Not one," she said truthfully. He kissed her temple gently. Yet not all stories stay calm forever. Late that summer, a letter arrived. The envelope bore her father's familiar handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The message was short. He had heard of her marriage, heard she was living on a cattle ranch in the Colorado Territory. His words were sharp and cold. He called her foolish, said she had thrown away her future for a reckless life among cowboys. He warned her that hardship would come, that love fades, that she would regret her choice. Eleanor folded the letter slowly. For a brief moment, an old doubt tried to creep in her heart. That evening, she showed the letter to Colt. He read it once and handed it back quietly. "I won't pretend this life is easy," he said. "There will be years when we struggle, years when weather or markets turn against us." He stepped closer and took her hands. "But I will never make you feel trapped. If you ever wish to leave, I would not hold you." Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of fear. "They tried to decide my life once before," she said softly. "I chose you. I choose you still." He brushed his thumb across her cheek. "You deserve love that is given freely," he said. She remembered the night on the porch in the snow. The first kiss that had startled her. The second one that had taught her something deeper. Love was not about control. It was about care. Autumn returned again, painting the land in warm colors. Eleanor began to feel a quiet change within her own body. Tiredness that lingered, a softness she had never known before. One evening, as they sat watching the sun dip below the horizon, she placed Colt's hand gently against her stomach. "There is something I have not told you," she said. He looked at her with concern. She smiled through nervous tears. "We are not alone anymore." For a heartbeat, he did not move. Then understanding dawned across his face. "You're certain?" She nodded. The strongest man she knew blinked back emotion. He pulled her into his arms and held her carefully, like she was something precious. "Our child," he whispered. "Our child," she repeated. The months that followed were filled with preparation. Colt expanded the house slightly, adding a small room near their own. Eleanor sewed tiny garments by lamplight. The town rallied around them with gifts and advice. Ma Halloway visited often, offering guidance with quiet authority. Martha Cooper brought extra blankets and stories of her own first child. On a cold morning the following spring, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. The pain was fierce, the hours long. Colt waited outside the bedroom door, pacing the floor like a man facing battle. When at last the cry of a newborn filled the house, he froze in place. Ma Halloway opened the door and nodded. "You may come in, Mr. Blackwood." He stepped inside slowly. Eleanor lay exhausted, but smiling. In her arms rested a tiny bundle wrapped in white cloth. Colt approached, as if afraid he might break something fragile. "She has your eyes," Eleanor whispered. He looked down at the small face and felt something inside him shift forever. "She has your strength," he replied. He leaned down and kissed Eleanor's forehead gently. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. In that moment, Eleanor understood something clearly. If she had stayed in Philadelphia, she would have lived a comfortable life, perhaps. But comfort without love would have hollowed her spirit. Here, life was not always simple, but it was real. Years later, when their daughter was old enough to ask how they met, Eleanor would smile softly and glance at Colt. "She ran away to find her freedom," he would say, "and he showed me what love truly feels like Eleanor. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Colt would still lean down and kiss her slowly in the same way he had on that snowy porch long ago. Never rushed, never taken without care. Her first kiss may have been unexpected, but the love that followed was chosen every single day, and that made all the difference.